Hey, I'm Roland with Mobile Geeks, and what I want to quickly do right now is just give you a very quick and fast and very not in-depth overview of the differences and the comparison, or a general comparison, of the HTC One M8 on the right side and the LG G3 on the left. So both devices are the flagship devices of their respective manufacturers for this year, although HTC is rumored to be bringing out a even more premium version of the HTC One M8, and LG will probably react to that in some way, I guess. But right now they're taking the crown in smartphone resolution, at least between the major manufacturers, because they're putting a 5.5-inch Quad HD display into the G3, which has a 2560 by 1440 resolution. It's a TFT panel, and it is definitely a gorgeous screen. And if you hold the two devices right next to each other, you'll see that they're pretty much the same brightness, although I think the HTC One M8 might be a bit brighter. Um, they're both sporting very decent viewing angles, although it seems to be the case that the color reproduction while looking from the side is a bit better on the HTC One M8 than on the G3 right here. But let's talk about the externals for a bit more. So if you look at the two devices from the front, you'll see that they're basically the same height. So there's only a tiny fraction of a difference in height between these two smartphones, and although the G3 is 5.5 inches and it's pretty much a lot larger than the M8, at least in screen real estate, you'll see that both devices are just as tall as the other one. That is caused by the fact that LG is using a screen that has very thin bezels on the G3 right here, and they're also saving space around the casing, so you only have minimal bezels on top and on the bottom of the device, while HTC is actually, well, some people think they're wasting space on the M8 right here because they are integrating this bar down here, and they're also giving away some space on the boom sound speakers that are on both ends of the devices, so they can't really build this device as compact as the G3 in this case. But when you put them on top of each other, you'll see that the G3 is actually much wider than the M8, so that's where the difference between the screen sizes actually comes really into play. So the M8 is a bit more, it's more easy to hold because it's just not as wide, and you don't have to grab around the device as far as you have to on the G3, because that's, although it's very, very small and compact for a device with this screen size, is definitely a pretty wide phone. If you hold them like this, you'll see that they're pretty much the same height or depth. So they're just as thick, and again, you can clearly see that they're just, the length of the two devices is pretty much the same on here. When it comes to the weight of the two devices, the M8 is losing to the G3, although the G3 has a bigger battery and a bigger screen, because the M8 is sporting this super premium aluminum finish. So this is a full metal body, and it weighs in at 160 grams. So that's actually 11 grams more than the G3 that is still made out of plastic. They're using a back cover that has a plastic base and is covered with some metal film, so they're mixing in metal particles to actually gain this very shiny look that I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but that is definitely giving the G3 also a premium look and feel. The G3, since it's so light and it is made out of plastic, doesn't feel as premium as the M8. So if you're really looking for something that is not only very sturdy but also looks good and has one of the best cases around right now, is definitely the M8 going ahead on the case quality. But in general, the G3 is also very great quality actually, and it's 11 grams lighter than the M8, coming in at 149 grams. Let's just quickly talk about the camera. So we have a 2.1 megapixel camera on the front of the M8, and I think there's also one 2.1 megapixel camera on the G3 right here. So both devices have pretty good, very well made cameras on both devices right here. They're both supposed to be able to take high quality selfies, but where there's a bigger difference is actually the back of the two devices. So let me just turn these off, turn them around, and on the M8 we have this duo camera setup that is using that ultra pixel sensor with a resolution of 4.3 megapixels combined with a dual LED flash, and up here we have this depth sensing camera that's also integrated in the M8 to gain this refocus effect through hardware that other companies are only realizing through their software stuff. Where the G3 actually has a 13 megapixel camera that's not using, the pixels are way smaller and they're pretty much the same size as on last year's G2, but the G3 has an improved sensor, and it's also using their new autofocus that is laser based, so that's definitely giving you a very quick autofocus time of under 0.3 seconds. Right next to that we also have a dual LED flash with different tones to optimize skin colors. While we're on the back, let's talk about the buttons on both devices. So the G3 sports LG's typical and signature rear keys, the so-called rear keys that are placed in the middle under their camera on the back right there. So we have the volume marker right here and the metallic standby button actually. On the M8 you actually have the classic button layout that HTC has been using on a bunch of its smartphones. So we have the volume rocker right here on the side, no buttons on the back, and the on and off button is actually situated up on top. So it's pretty much right here, so it's kind of hard to reach up here. And you also have to get used to the fact that the G3 has the buttons on the back, so both devices sport somewhat of a different button layout right here that is not as common in the industry and not used by that many manufacturers. Software-wise, they're both running a heavily modified interface based on Android 4.4.2. So we have the HTC Sense 6.0 version on the One M8 and the new LG UI on the G3 right here. They're both pretty professional looking actually. LG is sticking more to the standard Android look and feel, but they're modifying it with tons of their own icons and own color schemes, so that's definitely a difference towards the standard and out-of-the-box stock Android experience, where the HTC One M8 has, again, HTC Sense 6, and it's a pretty well customized version of Android right here, so also very performant. While using the interface, I felt that they're both there's a lot of time lost on the animations and stuff, so on both devices you don't really feel the speed. Everything's super fluid, so you don't have to worry about stuttering or anything. But overall, if you use stock Android, you will probably experience a bit better performance, but that's probably caused by the modifications that both manufacturers do on their devices. Talking about performance, they're pretty much up to par in many ways. So they're both using Snapdragon 801 processor. We have a 2.3 gigahertz MSM 8974 8B in the M8, but there's also a version running the same 2.5 gigahertz MSM 8974 AC that is also used in the G3. The HTC One M8 has 2 gigs of RAM and 16 gigs of onboard flash storage and a micro SD card slot, and that's pretty much the same that you also get on the G3. in some regions because there's a model with 2 gigs of RAM and 16 gigs of onboard flash storage, and a high-end model that actually has 3 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of onboard flash storage. There's also a micro SD card slot integrated right here, so that's accessible by removing the back cover. On the M8, it sits just above the volume marker right here on the side, or maybe even on the other side, because I can't really remember which one of the two ports or docks is actually for the SD card. The battery on the M8 is non-removable because you have a unibody design that doesn't have any openings, or you can't remove the back on the M8, whilst you can actually take off this plastic casing on the G3 right here to access the fully user serviceable 3000 milliampere hour battery. So you can remove that and actually put in another battery, which you can't do on the 2600 milliampere hour battery that is in the M8. The performance that is actually generated by the two Snapdragon 801 processors, I couldn't really measure that, but they should be pretty much on the same level. Since this is a pre-production model of the G3, the software hasn't been optimized, so I'm getting around, well, 33,000 points in Antutu benchmark, which is pretty much the same as you would get on the M8 right here. They're pretty close together, but again, the screen is much higher resolution on the G3, whilst the M8 is, well, sticking to their full HD resolution, but it's also a very, very nice and very sturdy device. The G3 is just coming out in Germany pretty soon, in the beginning of July, they said, or end of June, coming in at 549 euros for the 2 gig version with 16 gigs of onboard flash storage, and 599 euros for the 3 gigabytes and 32 gigs variant of the device. The M8 is actually available for just over 500 euros right now in Germany, using the 2 gig and 16 gigs of onboard flash storage single model that is available over here. The pricing, they're started out at pretty much the same price point, because the M8 actually launched at, I think, 679. That was the recommended retail price in euros. In the end, they'll probably end up being the G3 that is a bit cheaper, while the M8 is, well, a bit more of a premium price device. But that's also, they can definitely do that because the M8 is very, very well made and feels a bit better and not as light as the G3. It has a certain heft to it, so you have to really, well, you can throw this through a window, I believe, while this will probably not last the throw through a window. But other than the casing or the quality feel of the G3, which is still very nice, and it's very, very high actually. I haven't noticed any kinks or problems with the casing on the G3. It has the better screen. It has a super high resolution screen. It has more RAM available. It's a bit better priced. We have Android KitKat on both devices. I think this camera should be a bit better, but we'll see that in the extensive testing that we're going to start doing during Computex. And yeah, so definitely both recommendable, but the G3 is right now on top of the spec war, but we'll see how long that lasts. While I was rolling with Mobile Geeks, checking out the HTC One M8 compared to the LG G3. Thank you.